Welcome to Potluck, the ICTV talk show where everybody brings something to the table. I'm your host, Chris Fulton, and today we are talking with retired conservation officer Tom Chapin. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. You're welcome.
And you're in a different chair.
I am.
Normally, you would be on this side talking to someone else.
This is the first time.
Yes,
it's going to be interesting.
You know, for long-term ICTV users, they don't need an introduction. They've watched you. Your show has been on for 17 years.
Because of ICTV.
Right, right. But Just Outdoors, your show.
Just Outdoors, yes.
Has been on for 17 years,
17
if I did the math
years,
right.
Yeah. We went to about 120 shows we probably put through there.
That's a lot of time sitting in this chair, talking to people in that chair.
It's been a great ride.
Not only that, though. I mean, not only have you done that many shows, your shows are the most popular that ICTV shows. On YouTube, primarily.
On YouTube. Wow.
Yeah, and I looked up, I went to YouTube before we started, and I looked up Tom Chapin, Just Outdoors.
Do you know what it is? It's the people I interview. They're from all over the area here, and they just do a great job.
They do a great job.
Once you get a person talking about what they're doing out in the outdoors, you just let them ride.
Right, right.
Great,
no,
so.
They're great, you're great. But the important point is, because they track these things, and particularly on YouTube, the piece you did on deboning northern pike, that was 400,000 hits. 400,000 separate people have watched that video. And the big one that you did, the most watched show at ICTV ever, and it'll be hard to break that record. I believe you get with 900,000 hits.
900,000 hits, yeah.
Processing a white-tailed deer.
Processing a white-tailed deer, and that deer was taken that morning. In town on a local hunt in town with a bow and arrow.
Oh wow!
And then he brought it over, and about 2 hours later, we got it in the garage, and I got a professional meat cutter there, and he came over and just did a wonderful job. So that's why.
I don't think we'll get that many of these.
No.
But we'll get a few to add. You can add it onto your chart of how many hits. You're almost an influencer.
Well, that
would be the current word for you.
Wow, I have to look that one up.
That would be the current word. And for those of people that don't know you, but they're local, I would say try to find the Herald Review from 3 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, and you were on the front page. It was the bottom of the page, but you were still on the front page. And it was talking about the re-release of your book. And we're going to talk about that towards the end. But
just a little bit toward the end, that the books have been refreshed.
They have been refreshed.
We'll talk about what that means.
But did you know that you were in the paper twice that day?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm just going to read this piece. I love local history. And so every Sunday, right behind the sports section, right behind the sports section, there's the historical review.
Yes, every 10 years.
Yeah, every 10 years they pull highlights out of what was published. June 9th, 1985, Tom Chapin of Grand Rapids has been named Outstanding Conservation Officer of the Year for the state of Minnesota. And I read that and I said, I knew you were good, but that's impressive. I mean, I remember you as a kid.
Really?
Yeah, I was out hunting in the woods, and
that's good. Yeah.
You never had to chase me. but in the state of Minnesota, any rough number, how many conservation officers there are or were?
Well, we'll get into that. That's what people like. They like numbers.
Yeah.
There's about 140 conservation officers in the field right now. In the state of Minnesota. And believe it or not, back in the 30s, there were more. There were more conservation officers, and about maybe half the number of people hunting and fishing back then. But it's just never increased.
Yeah.
But if you want to compare that number, you might want to look at the Highway Patrol. They've got about 650 people in the field. We got 140 covering 84,000 square miles. And what that does, if you look at the numbers, is it averages about 800 square miles of patrolling for each officer.
That's amazing.
And so when people say, and we have a lot of this, I'll go up and check somebody in those years. Geez, I've never been checked by a conservation officer or a game warden. That's probably true. Most people have never been checked by a conservation officer. Most people that hunt and fish never have. And the reason is we don't have cover an area like that. And then you take this particular area, Chris, that I have here. It's about the third largest area as far as that I had to cover by myself. A number of lakes and rivers, and then you add I had about 335 lakes I had to patrol here in my patrol area. Well, figure that one guy, and then 800 square miles. And another thing is that we have here, and we're so lucky in this county, and people have to be reminded sometimes. And boy, I was reminded all the time when I went out that we have public land here,
Lots of it, yeah.
Lots of public land. And where can you go in southern Minnesota, central Minnesota, drive your car, get out of your car and just walk in the woods, almost anywhere north here, and not be bothered by a landowner saying you're trespassing.
Right.
There's no trespass. If there's no sign up and it's woods, you can walk in there and go. And then you got these lakes way back in there, and some of them haven't been fished for years. And talk about living in such a beautiful, gorgeous area. I'm so fortunate to have been here and done the job that I liked in this particular Grand Rapids, Minnesota. You couldn't find a better spot. As far as I'm concerned.
Let's back up then.
Back up, okay.
If my math is right, you earned this recognition as the best conservation officer in the state of Minnesota after about 13 years of service.
Correct.
That seemed like a very short time, and that's what impressed me so much, is the fact that you made your mark early on. But I want to know what brought you to this field. What made you become a conservation officer?
Let's not dwell on it, but quickly.
Yeah.
Everybody had their career test in 9th grade.
Yeah.
I don't know if it went on when you were.
Sure.
You had this career test, and you look, and of course I was raised in rural Hibbing, and I could hunt right out my back door, and not a lot of fishing over there, but I did get some fishing in. My parents were very sports-minded, and my dad encouraged me to do this. So all of a sudden, I get this test, and it's 95%. I was headed for, according to this test, a career in the outdoors. So I said, one of the best jobs you could ever have in the outdoors would be a game warden. Game wardens changed their name in 1967. That's when they stopped calling game wardens, and they became conservation officers.
I was wondering about what the difference is. I did not know that.
There's quite a bit of difference, because then the conservation officers acquired a lot more duties. Besides game and fish enforcement, they then added on all the new recreational activities in our woods and our fields and forests. Snowmobiles, and then 1980 ATVs, and then all these new environmental issues that are producing all these new environmental regulations and laws. Mm-hmm. Your boats, you got to drain, all that. That stuff is all on the shoulders of conservation officers right now. And so that's been a lot of added activities on their duties. And so, yeah. And so, I took a test after I got out of the Army. Within 2 weeks after getting out of the service, I went to the Hibbing High School, took a test. They had 1,300 applicants in the state for 13 jobs.
Wow.
And I had a biology background. I figured, well, let's give it a shot. It was I said, I can work with the DNR. I could try to get a job with the DNR someplace. But boy, being a game warden constable, that would be the top. And I passed the test. And from there on, it was history. I had to go through all the oral, everything all the way up. But yeah, and then I was stationed on the southern border of Minnesota, which is, you talk about environmental. totally different than just
absolutely.
Zero. There's no public land down there. Basically, you're working with private land, farms and stuff, and it's a totally different method of enforcing game and fish laws on private land than it is on public land. There's all kinds of problems down there. You got to get permission to do this. It's really a whole different ball game. And after 2 years, I just this opening came up in Grand Rapids, and being Grand Rapids, I always wanted to, basically, when I was a kid, move to Grand Rapids or move west anyway, where there's some lakes. And I guess I hit the jackpot here.
You did hit the jackpot.
And then from then on, I was so happy to be here, and I just started out the first day. I remember the first day I went out, I had no idea where I was, what I was doing. I basically threw a dart on the map. I said, oh, and it hit a lake, believe it or not. Why not? And so I headed out toward that lake, and from then on, I started learning how to do the job in this area. It took me basically about 10 years to get my feet on the ground here. It really does. It takes about that long. But the people are so great here. I mean, I ran into a lot of things, but most of the time, 90% of the time you go out and people really actually wanted to get checked. Because they've been purchasing a license for 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, and
following the rules.
Yeah, and basically I had this feeling that I hunted and fished. And I always put myself in a position, how would I feel if I was checked by an officer? You know how you're on the highway and you let up on the gas when you see a patrolman? Well, they kind of do that in a boat too sometimes. They feel a little uneasy. And I tried to make people feel as easy as I would have wanted to feel being checked. And 90% of the time, but then after a while, during that 10 years, you develop a sense when you check people, when you check hundreds and thousands of people, especially on lakes, you get the sense of maybe there's the way they answer you and their body language. Body language is huge in law enforcement. Anybody in law enforcement will tell you that.
Things like eye contact.
Eye contact, movement. It's just crazy. I have one. I'm going to tell this, but you go out in a boat and there's 10 boats out there, and you wander around, and you got a uniform on, and you look around, and I call it the neck jerk. You look around, which boat am I going to check? Because you're only going to check one, basically, or two. The other ones are going to take off if they've got a problem. And so you look around, and then the person would, in the boat, you'd watch a couple of people in the boat, and they'd see the uniform, and then they'd jerk their neck back like this, their head back.
Ignore that uniform.
And I said, I had a lot of civilians with me. I said, we're going to check that boat. Well, why are you going to check that boat? I'll talk to you later on this. And I was about 80%.
Good read.
Yeah. So you learn that kind of stuff as you're going along. But it was great. It was fun. Just all kinds of stuff.
Okay, go back to your earlier days and talk about what your day looked like, what your week looked like.
Back then.
Because I think that's changed.
It's changed a lot. Most the officers today, from what I understand, I don't know a lot about what they're doing right now, but they're scheduled. And they got to get on the computer, show the hours, where they are, what they're doing, which is okay, but they're scheduled. Sometimes I think they can pick their hours, but it's only like 8 hours. When I first started here, it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's just steady. I'd get 20 to 40 phone calls a day sometimes at my house in the fall. All kinds of things. And you wanted to answer that phone every time. 98% of them were questions about the law.
Okay.
Well, that was my job. The more I could answer questions about the regulations, the more legal they were. They'd pick up that phone. They called for a reason. And if I could spend some time on the phone with them, and they felt better about enforcement.
Sure.
Right? And then 2% were information, and you were looking for that. And most of that information was after dark, So I'd have to go out. But I was all alone. I was always alone. I never had anybody. No matter where I went, I was alone.
Which amazed me even as a kid. And I still think of this. you're alone, it's night, you're remote, and you're probably on some activity, and we're going to talk about poaching here.
Yes.
That puts you in danger. And it just amazes me that that would have been part of your duties and how they were carried out.
Yeah.
In those days.
Well, the only way I can answer that is, and every conservation officer out there and every law enforcement officer really believes in their training.
Yeah.
And we got training on laws and everything, but we also got training on self-defense and situational training and how to approach and things like that. So, we probably overdid it in our feeling about that. We were kind of, but we felt good about our training. So I didn't have a lot of apprehension in that area until a few things happened during my career here with some bad actors.
I suspect your approach that you described of being forthright.
Yes.
And probably coming across fairly friendly, just you're not there.
Friendly, but yet forceful enough that they would respect your situation, that you're alone,
sure.
and that maybe you or have backup or something like that, But there are a couple situations that I ran into that I felt pretty tough situations, and I always use those to think about those things while I continued my career. Oh, you really got to watch yourself. Maybe, Tom, a little closer than you have been. And so, and as things progressed in 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's more drugs out there than there were when I started. I mean, it got pretty tough through the 90s. Boy, many cars you stopped at night with probable cause. You always have to have probable cause to search and to do all these things. You'd find drugs, some form of hallucinogenic drugs in like 50% of the stops they made after dark, and that really increased from the early years where I hardly saw anything.
Yeah, it increases the risk.
Well, risk because it does different things to the attitude of the person you're stopping, And so I had to watch kind of for that. Also in boats, fish shelters, big time. So it was interesting to look through all that. I look back on that, and it's really, really something. So
yeah, you saw a lot of changes over the time you were in uniform.
A lot of changes over almost 30 years.
I mean, you talk about the advent of snowmobiles,
yes,
proliferation of snowmobiles, four-wheelers.
Yes. And four-wheelers, people,
trails now that you have to
all these trails, and then snowmobile trails were non-existent when I started. And they started making, you got the snowmobile clubs getting together, which was great. Mm-hmm. And they were in charge of the trails. They got 80% of their funding from the government to build these trails. Then they had this group got together and they'd raise funds for the other 20%. And look at the trails we got around here. They're terrific.
It's just
and
incredible.
How many snowmobile groups there are? It must be, I don't know, just in Itasca County, there must be 8 or 9,
Yeah.
And then the ATV trails came in. Of course, we didn't have four-wheel ATVs until in 1885, believe it or not, the first ones. And that progressed, from the three-wheelers, and now they got groups that guide. When you join something like that, you're more respectful of the environment and more respectful of laws. You want to know the laws before you go out, and I think there's less and less violations in that area than there used to be, and I think that's a good thing.
I would agree. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So when I was working the first, about the first 20 years here, we were in charge. I was basically one guy of all the bear complaints. And our duty was, when we got a bear complaint, we had to set a trap and trap these bears out of these areas. Sometimes, and I talked to another officer I worked with around here, he says...
And you're talking live traps.
Live traps. And Tom, during July, it took 50% of my time. Well, what about enforcement work? That was 50%. Okay. let's add a couple more things, particularly in this area. Beaver trapping and beaver dams, basically. We were trained in explosives.
Oh boy.
And the explosives went from dynamite to Kinapac to ammonium nitrate now. We had to go out and blow all these beaver dams that were blocking people's roads and culverts. And
sure.
It was interesting because if the guy on the right side of the river that was blocking wanted the beaver and the guy on the left side didn't want the beaver, then we had a conflict. Should I blow the beaver dam or not? A lot of conflicts there on that. So I had to, just talk to the people gently and say, this is what we're doing. So that took a lot of time. And then every car-killed deer in my area, and I had over 250 a year, I had to take care of. Either salvage, I could gut a deer in the dark in 1 minute and 19 seconds. I had a guy time me one night. Yeah. Because you want to salvage them, right?
Right.
And then I take them, hang them, sell them for, I think, like $7. I donate them to groups in town for feeds and things like that. But the bear, the beaver, and the deer, that took up a huge amount of time. And a lot of those calls at night were that.
Right.
And so you'd go out and basically I kept my uniform on a lot of times 24 hours a day. I mean, what are you going to do, and by the way, if you got a uniform on, you're a peace officer.
Right.
Sheriff, you are required to carry a firearm. If you're caught without a firearm, you're going to get written up by your boss if you have a uniform on. So that was one of the questions that comes in with a lot of people on that.
So all this contact time you had with bears made you a fan of bears, didn't it?
Yes, I like bears. I know people, but I got so used to bears, letting them out of the trap, walk around me. They're really a docile animal. They really are. This bear attack thing, I mean, you got to really look into it. Did it attack them or did it just run over them? They can only see about 10 feet. They can't make anything out past about 10 feet. This is what they use, the nose. And so they smell and they'll, no, I've never had any incidents with bears. Because I took care of them. I moved them so they wouldn't be shot, so they wouldn't be molested. And so my job was to save the bears. And I guess I like that. Save an animal. That's one of the reasons they're out there, right? Besides enforcement, so. Yeah.
I want to spend a little time talking about what if there were no wardens. And that's going to lead us into something that I certainly know you love to write about, but also love to talk about, and that's poaching. But imagine you might never get checked by a warden, but they're there.
No, they're out there.
Yeah. But what if I'm out fishing and I'm never going to be checked because wardens don't exist.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons.
Not wardens, conservation officers don't
exist. That's one of the reasons I tried to get as much coverage on some of my cases in the paper and stuff. And that would get the word out that there's a warden out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Even though it was kind of false, because how could I be everywhere? But the question was.
On that though.
Yeah.
You used to put something probably in the paper, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
There is still, I've read it fairly recently, a conservation officer's report, and it basically lists all the different regional conservation officers and what they've been doing. Just for something to look at, checking ATV trails, checking boats on opening day, that kind of thing.
But your question was, what if there were no people enforcing the game and fish laws?
Yeah.
And game and fish laws, we have all these statutes. In the state statute, Minnesota statute, let's see, this is a row of them. And the game and fish laws are a section out of this. And it's actually 97 to 102. And those are the game and fish laws, and that's what we concentrated on. We could make arrests on everything, DWIs, everything else, but we concentrated on this. And so, because of that, you know, if there were no officers going out and checking people, how would you feel? You know, I mean, the reason we have laws is to make things equal out there for everybody, provide equality and fairness.
And fairness, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Do you want, I mean, if you're out there fishing on any lake, do you want the person just down the line here and you watch him, do you want him taking more than what the state statute, the limit allows? Well, not really. I mean, you're following the law like 90% of the people do. We're only talking about a small percentage of people that violate, you know. But you want them doing that. Well, fairness and equality comes in there. Not really. What they're doing is, if you buy a license, what are you purchasing? You're purchasing a contract between you and the government, the state of Minnesota. There's a contract that they provided you with a contract. And that contract says that you will observe all the laws and regulations about hunting and fishing. Well, that contract, if you fail to follow that contract, you're committing a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor. You're violating the regulations and the law. And so if you look at it that way, it's pretty nice that they're providing a contract and they're providing you to take and possess game and fish. And once you possess those legally, the government can't come and take it away from you. Nobody can take those game and fish away from you.
Right.
You got your limit in your freezer. Nobody can come in and take those out of there because you have that contract. You spent $20-some on that license, and there you are.
Probably $30 or more now.
Well, $30 or more, yeah. But really, when you look at it, a couple cups of coffee and come on now, you know.
Pretty insignificant.
yeah.
In the grand scheme of things of being able to get out and enjoy.
You know, if you look at it that way, and the fishermen and hunters look at it that way, that's pretty neat. You know, I got a contract. Here's my contract right here, and I'll show you my contract. And the conservation officer says, "Oh, you're good to go." You know, so pretty neat deal.
Yeah.
So,
but not everybody follows that contract.
Not all of them.
You know, and this is where I would say your expertise is in. I mean, the expertise in a lot of things, but you focused very heavily when you weren't chasing bears and doing that kind of thing that occupied your time. You focused significantly on poaching. In other words, who's out violating those statutes?
Yeah.
And what time of day is it and everything. So let's talk about poaching, because that's what your book's about. It's stories about
we'll talk about the
you've
book.
made. We'll talk about the book.
That seems to be the most exciting for the public to listen to some of these stories that would only happen if you were a conservation officer. I mean, it's some of these things that I've experienced. You had to write about. I mean, it's just I hate to have them go into oblivion, you know, and not have people understand what's going on out there. And they understand what's going on out there with some of this 10% by the stories that I've written. And so, you know, why do people poach?
Right.
Well, I kind of came up with reasons why they poach, and I've used this for years, and I think it's pretty legitimate. But I look at the first one would be bragging rights. Well, you know, everybody brags about something at one time in their life, and boy, if they're going to brag about things, and if they're hunters and fishermen, they want to go back and kind of squeeze the story a little bit higher to their peers and brag about some of these things. And that's a big deal, this bragging thing. So that will sometimes put a really good sportswomen over the edge a little bit. They'll just kind of bend the law a little bit for the, oh boy, you know, I've got this fish, it's illegal, but I got to show it to my buddies. You know, it's either out of season or different out of the length limits and stuff like that. When I started, there were no length limits, on fish. And the next one is opportunity. Boy, the legalist fisherman and hunter gets out there and he follows the laws. He's got the license. He's got the duck stamps. He's gone through all that. He hasn't shot a limit of ducks in 12 years, and here comes these ducks coming in. And he says, I can't hold myself back. I'm just gonna shoot everything. Well, I'll get rid of the extra ducks somewhere while the warden's watching or something, while he's over the limit, or he shoots 2 possession limits in one day.
But he doesn't think the warden's watching because he's never been checked.
Never been checked. And so that's opportunity, okay? So that's another example that may push somebody over the edge. I'm talking about the legal hunters and fishermen. Almost all the people I went out there were just great. I mean, I love talking to people in the boats because I hunted and fished. And I was in their boat mentally, hunting and fishing, or fishing. And I really enjoyed talking to people that get excited about hunting and fishing. And especially if they're from the cities, the Twin Cities, they come up here. Chris, they got a day and a half to fish, or maybe 2 days, unless they're staying at a resort or something. But they come up for the weekend. I used to say, "Where are you from?" And all that, and I connect. I'd give them a break. I'd say, "Hey, man, enjoy yourself out here, because you're living in the Twin Cities, a place that I don't want to live in, and you're coming up here, and you got a day and a half, 2 days to just relax and take it easy. Let's not have the government put pressure on you. Enjoy yourself."
Yep. Enjoy the playground of Minnesota, which is right up around where we live.
Yeah. The third reason is greed. That's getting a little more into the gal. More into the poacher type.
Right.
We want to fill the freezer. We don't know why we want to fill the freezer, but we want to fill the freezer. Well, we're going to eat most of it, but we might be throwing a lot of it. But I got a full freezer of game and fish. Well, it's probably illegal because you can't have more than your possession limit. By the way, you can have your possession limit for members of your family in that freezer too. I don't know if you got 5 people in the family, you only got 1 license. You can still have possession limit for those people too. Yeah. They don't have to.
I don't know that I knew that.
Well, there you go. And we're going to cover other things.
I don't have any fish in my freezer.
Fish in your freezer. So the greed thing, and I saw a lot of that. Where I pick a lot of this up is when on my coffee breaks at the restaurants. My ears would get this big, and I'd listen around, and I occasionally pick up some good information. Go out and take a license number down on a car, and then I listen again. 3 weeks later, and I said, "Okay, there's a target. I gotta stop this guy and bring him around, and maybe the deterrent would be maybe a fine. Who knows? You know what the biggest deterrent on most sportsmen are, though? It's not the fine. It's not jail. It's loss of a piece of equipment.
Sure.
A gun, a fishing rod, and the gun. Their grandfather always owned the gun, and yeah, it's that. Their name in the paper was a big thing too. That was number 2.
Public exposure would be
and
a
that
bad
happened
thing.
The first 10 years I was here. The local paper put everybody's names in the paper. When that left, that was a huge deterrent that was disqualified from good enforcement. Really, which is pretty sad. I really thought that was a good deterrent, And so, yeah.
Before you leave that, and going back to my initial point about how impressed it is that you were named the Minnesota Conservation Officer of the Year, you personally drove some legislation to get at the point that you talked about where you're able to take possessions away from people who have large violations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I could. 1999, I had run into such huge major violations on Lake Winnie we're talking thousands of fish, and we're going to see pictures here. Thousands of fish they'd go home with after 2.5 days of fishing. They'd come back the same week and get thousands of more fish. And this was mostly Wisconsin. And I said, this is ridiculous. This is really hurting our resource. I don't think I saved a lot of game when I was working. I mean, one guy, you take a deer or something, you're not saving a lot of game. What you're doing is providing that fairness again.
Right.
Okay, that's. I don't think I ever said, but this particular situation, I said, this has got to stop. So I went to the fisheries. They followed me out. They said, boy, we weren't even quite sure this was going on like this bad. And I said, well, yeah, you're not out checking like I am. And they got together. And I finally went to the state legislature, talked to the Game and Fish Committee, had a big talk in this big building, and there were 50 legislators in there. And I convinced them with photos. I had a slideshow of about 40 photos that were taken within the last year, and totally convinced them that there's a problem here. So they changed the law, and I said, you're going to have some sort of a remedy too to stop them from continuing to do this. You have to have a bigger deterrent. And so what they did is they raised it. If you had more than 3 times your limit of animals and fish, then it would be a gross misdemeanor, and you would lose your privileges to hunt and fish for a year. It's in a gross misdemeanor level.
Okay.
Your fine could be up to $3,000. It could be a year in jail. You don't get that on a misdemeanor. And also you lose your equipment, boats, motors and stuff like that, cars. We could always take a car for deer shining. That's always a gross misdemeanor. But in this level on a misdemeanor, I felt pretty good about that, because right now the limit is 20 and 40 perch on Winnie. And it saved the lake basically, because they were taking hundreds and hundreds of fish every day over there.
Wow.
And so, and that's still in effect, and perch fishing is good on Winnie, and the walleyes are going, and so, yeah. So the last thing on type of poacher is the generational ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Family,
generational poaching is the family. Handed down. The methods that they use, handed down, it was just a way of life in some areas where Grandpa did it, my dad's doing it, he's teaching me, and it's just a way of life. And there's some areas in the county here that I spent 80% of my time on in 1 or 2 townships out of 13 townships that I had, because of the generational poaching. I thought that was more important to follow that, because I've got a lot of information on this. I had a lot of people giving me information. They would poach the generational poachers as opposed to 90% of the good people. These were people that had no respect for the law at all, and they poached 365 days a year. It was continual. If they saw an animal, shoot it, take it, trap it, whatever, they'd get on the phone, call everybody in their little group, 8, 10 guys. They see a moose coming through, that moose is going to be dead. Just and they call, and they I got to get, and they split it up. And I got all the information, direct information on all this stuff. And
how do you break those?
How do you break? You don't break it. You break it. Okay. Oh, how do you break the generation thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Boy, that's tough.
That's a tough one.
Chris, I ran into a couple 17-year-old kids with an illegal deer one day in August, and they had no idea they were poaching.
Say what?
No.
Really?
Generational. Their dad did it every day. Their grandfather did it every day. They didn't learn anything in school on what that was. There were no licenses ever bought. They had no connection with the Department of Natural Resources. This was their way of life.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. That's why we have this show.
Wow.
Right. And so, but anyway, how do you break it? Education. Everything's education. Education. Behavior is education, right? How do you behave with a gun, a bow, a fishing rod? You learn. It's behavior. Sometimes the law has to come in and tick you a little bit with a fine or something. Okay, maybe I can't.
That's education.
Yeah, but as far as breaking that father-son relationship, I don't know. But there's less and less kids hunting and fishing right now, and I really find that difficult to accept. There's got to be more hunters and fishermen out there at that young age. There's programs, and you see them starting. So anytime you see a program around where a kid's got a rod or they're out in the field, boy, encourage that. That's really good.
Yeah.
So, half the job was humor too. I mean, it was some of the things people would tell you, some of the things people did, the questions they asked. It was really humorous, and it's not going beneath these people. It was just a humorous situation out there sometimes. Sometimes I make it humorous too. I'd ask them certain questions, and so I jotted all this stuff down. I kept it all. But this I got to cover this. It's what we always hear as game wardens. Okay, we hear that all bears are big.
The bear in my yard was a big bear.
Okay, big bear. See, all doe deer are nice.
Yeah.
And I checked, somebody, you have a deer? Yeah, I got a nice doe hanging back here. Nice. Okay. And that all walleyes that they have in their cooler or their freezer, they're decent. That's just the way it is. Big bears, nice does, decent walleyes. Game wardens can search your freezer anytime. No. They're a peace officer. Just like any sheriff,
right.
Anybody, we have to have probable cause. We have to get a search warrant signed by a judge.
Yeah.
Okay? Here, now I can search your freezer. That's pretty tough to get. Game wardens have more powers than other law enforcement officers. No more powers. We always have been, always will be, the same as any other enforcement officer, only enforcing certain statutes.
Yep.
Game wardens don't have to buy game and fish licenses. That's false. But some people think that. Game wardens can keep some of the confiscated fishing game as long as they give it to their family members. No, I can't have anything more in my freezer than anybody else. Yes, I had a lot of game and fish hanging in my garage and all over, but that was donated. All that was donated,
So I can imagine an organization like Pike for Vets, which used to be huge.
Oh, I used to donate hundreds and hundreds of fish to Pike for Vets. Yes, and they didn't all come out of the river right here either, by the way. Okay, some of them did. Game wardens have a lower than average conviction rate. Way higher. Let's talk quickly about that.
Okay.
Why? Why do we have a 98% conviction rate in court? When a game warden comes into court, it's 98% chance he's going to bet, even with a jury. Okay? Because we're the person that observes the violation. You're the observer of the violation. Well, most other law enforcement, they aren't the observers of the violation, other than traffic. But when a police officer or sheriff is called to a situation, the violation has already been committed. Mm-hmm. And so they are investigators. And so there's a 3-tier thing there. Investigate, find a witness. We're the witnesses. We're always the witnesses. And so the judge will say, we want a witness to that. Well, a uniformed officer goes, I'm the witness. And so that's why you have to have a good relationship with your judge, and he has to know that you are an honest officer, because he's not going to deal with you in the next 10 years if he thinks you're pulling something on him.
Right.
So that's why our conviction rate is so high, and that's why our stories are so high, because we're watching and observing the person violating all the time. And so that produces an interesting story, right?
Yeah. Speaking of stories, background for me is I lived away for a long time.
Yes.
But my mom and dad were really good about keeping me connected to Grand Rapids. And one of the things they did is they sent me a copy, your original copy of Poacher's Cot. And I read it probably in one sitting as a former hunter and fisher up here in the North Woods. And it just connected with me. It hooked me. I loved reading it. You're an excellent writer. Your stories, they're well written, but they're humorous. And I know it's intentional, and probably that's just how you dealt with situations in any case.
Well,
but it's such a good book, and you're having a republishment of it and a little bit of an upgrade to it. So just talk about it a second, then I want you to get into some quick stories. You got some pictures real quick, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah. The book started with my sister at a Thanksgiving. She listened to all these stories all this time. I just retired. She said, you should write a book or something. I can't write a book. No, you really should write. So, let me give it a shot. How do you write a book? Well, I found out how to write a book. It was amazing work. Took me about 2 years to come up with the right publisher, the illustrator, the distributor, and how are you going to do a self-published book? Well, I self-published the first book, and it came out, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I put 35 grand into it. I mortgaged my cabin, the whole thing. My dad said, you're nuts, that's going to go. And he wasn't all wrong on that. But
you knew you had a good thing.
I figured I did. It was one of a kind. And who's going to, these stories. And so, and it was local, right here. 20 miles within the police station, from the police station in Grand Rapids.
You don't mention names, but I can picture them. Just a face.
Yeah.
It's an anonymous face, but I can picture it.
Yep. I got the book going, and after the first couple, you have to have book signings to get the book out. And the book signings went really good, and my publisher saw that, and he got it out for me, different areas, about 3-4 state area, to different places that sold books. And then my wife, Sandy, and I went on the road for 5 years. Every week, we went to a different place in Minnesota. And we decided which were the best, which were the least. Took us a while to sell more books. We sold them like this physically to everybody, signed them. And we wound up selling about 7,000 books that first year, just by going like this. And the publisher got a hold of it. And he says, boy, this is, I think it's all about money. So they're not going to do something without making money.
Right.
And so they started, and it's become very successful. So, and then 2 years later, I wrote a second book because I had more stories, see. Then I really put some stories.
They came back to you, didn't they?
Yeah. And so I hear accolades about the second book too. So anyway, that went on. 22 years they've been out, the first book. And the average lifespan of a self-published book is 7 months. In the United States, it's 7 months.
You got years and years out of it. That's amazing.
Yeah, and they're selling as well as they did the first year. And so I thought, wow. And so because they're selling that well, the publisher decided to, hey, let's refresh these books. And what does that mean? Well, he bring the book up, the language, to the next generation, so that a 17, 18, 19-year-old, or even a 28, 30-year-old, because it's been that long, can understand the language a little better and make it read a little smoother for that person with the newer language. And it worked. It's just, they read the new ones. I couldn't believe how they could change the language, just a little, not the stories, but the language a little bit. So they did that. Then they put all new covers on it. And so that just came out the 20th of May. And they're both available at the local bookstore here, and she's real good down there.
Yeah, she is. Yeah. She is.
So,
and you just recently did a book signing.
A couple days ago, I did a book signing. But anyway, I'm pretty well done with distributing the books. You have to find a distributor. Well, my publisher is my distributor. And he's thinking about getting the books out throughout the country, which is just, and who would have thought, talking to my goofy sister, at a Thanksgiving meal, that this would have come out this way. But my books are in every national park in the country right now.
Wow.
You go in a national park and they're in there. So,
and if you're driving around and you see that poster hanging on the front, you're probably inside signing copies.
And if you want to hear the story on this poster, you've never read it, it's in the book.
There you go.
So just leave it right there. But anyway, Chris, it's just been a wonderful trip. And
yeah, sounds like it.
I'm just so happy that I happened to to get this station in Grand Rapids, I had to compete against a couple other wardens, and they just, let's try Chapin up there. And it's a regional office, so they wanted somebody, active guy in a regional office. And so I took off the first day, and I feel like I did the job here. And so, but the people are just wonderful. I mean, well, you know that.
Yeah, I do.
You love Grand Rapids as much as I do.
Yeah, the people, the quality of life is hard to beat.
Oh, yeah. You just can't do it.
So I want to close with some stories, quick though. You brought some pictures. So if you don't mind, let's just look through the pictures real quick.
These
just to get a feel for.
These are poaching pictures.
Yeah.
I have a lot of humor pictures. But I just got to...
No, these are pretty serious pictures.
These are pretty serious pictures, but we were talking through this interview about the amount of fish and game that is poached by folks in that generational area there, and also the greed factor.
Right.
And that's what we're covering here. So... What I just I'll just show them to you.
Yeah. And the listeners will be able to see pictures of them.
Yeah. So, Chris, this is just one of the many freezers I checked at campgrounds and resorts. And this person, I checked him out on the lake, and he had his 5 walleyes. He had 1 to go, but he gave me that look and that feeling,
and your radar went off.
I said, well, I said, how you been doing up here? Well, pretty good. And they came up for 2 weeks, and it was their 7th day, him and his wife. And I said, well, then you won't have any problem with me checking your freezer. Well, the hesitation there for that 3 seconds says, I got something here. And so we went in, and he allowed me to check his freezer. I would have checked it anyway with other things I saw there. He was so cheap he wouldn't buy his wife a license. That's another one. You buy 1 license, I'm going to take as many fish as I want. You don't even need one anyway. That would have covered another possession limit, but I run into that quite a bit.
I'll bet.
Yeah. So I went into his freezer, and he had already given 30 fish, 30 walleyes away to other people in the resort. I talked to them. Yeah, he gave me a bunch of fish. And, well, I got him. There was 85 walleyes in his freezer.
Wow.
Here. And he had another week to fish. So that's going back to Indiana.
You'd have to get a new freezer, it looks like.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Anyway, that's one. Okay, quickly. This is probably one of the biggest fish busts in the history of Minnesota, as far as numbers go. Perch. This is the perch out of Winnie. These are perch. And this is 3 days of fishing for 6 people. And this is my garage floor, and this was 9 people. There were 9 people involved. 3,750 perch. This was their second trip up that week from eastern Wisconsin. What were they doing with these fish?
You can't eat that many fish.
They were selling them. Getting $13 a pound at all the restaurants along the western side of Lake Michigan, along in there. And
Friday night fish fries.
You've seen signs, Friday night fish fries. And Lake Winnie was, our lake, Itasca County residents, was providing all the fish for those people over those restaurants.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's just one, this is just one group of people now. And this involved
it's probably not their first time.
This involved a high-speed chase through Grand Rapids to catch these guys. They got around me at Blandon because I knew they were coming. And they went around me, and I stopped them. Finally, with the help of the local police department here, at the Sawmill Inn, if I remember where that was.
Sure.
And pulled them over, and the back of their truck was full. So, and further interviews showed what they were doing. This is just a wildlife picture. We have a rule: when you trap and you use a snare or a trap, you should have it covered so that the raptors won't come in and feed on that. Your bait should be covered. And this is one of the reasons, and I run into this a lot. This is just one picture of a bald eagle being caught in a snare.
Wow.
He'd land, eagle, and he'd look and he'd get into the snare or get in the trap. A lot of them I saved, a lot of them I didn't. This one I saved. I got it to the Raptor Center, but that's just some of the stuff we ran into, with game.
But there's a statute that says how you're supposed to put those traps out.
This is in the parking lot as you're coming in by the center, the recreational center there. I pulled this outfit over. I had information on these guys, and they came up for a week, and they fished, and they said they didn't have any fish in their boats.
Bad fishing week.
I said, no, we throw everything back. And I said, well, if you throw everything back, you're not going to have a problem me looking in your boats then. Yeah, the hesitation thing. And up in the front of these boats, right up in here, you can see these are not Minnesota boats. They're real flat. They're from Illinois. And they had them all the fish stashed in the front. And they had 149 largemouth bass.
Wow.
In there. So that's pretty good bust,
Yeah.
And these are the type of people you want. And the word gets around on this because this always went in the paper, see? And so that's why I use the local paper to get this. And maybe that gets back to the resort. And I always go back to the resort and tell them about this. And they didn't know what was going on.
Really?
And they put their pictures up in the resort fish cleaning station. Perfect. So it was deterrent of all this. PR, huge deterrent. Something like this. This is that generational poaching, okay? You weren't allowed does during this season. Antlerless season was closed. In the 70s, it was hard to find deer.
I remember the year they closed the season.
They closed the season, and they had huge restrictions on the taking of deer. And deer was really a product that people really wanted because they had, through generations, that's what they ate. Well, this is up in the area where these generational poachers are from, the dangerous people I call them because they were dangerous. I ran into some real bad situations up there. This is the 2 days before deer season.
Oh.
That one group of poachers, 4 people poached in one night. They shined them, all does, just north on County Road 49 up here. Not far from Grand Rapids, 10 miles?
And if you think of how many fawns those does would have over the courses of their life.
Yes. And
what an impact.
And shouldn't this really make the good sportsman mad?
It makes me mad just looking at it.
Well, they buy a license. They probably don't get a deer. 20% of the people only got a deer back then. And here's these deer. So, unsolved.
Oh.
Yeah. We didn't get them all. And one more. I think this is probably the biggest walleye bust possibly in the history of Minnesota. I'm not sure, but I think it's right up there, 1 or 2. This is a car that I stopped coming out of a resort right at sunrise. I was going to set up a road check, putting up the sign, and the car came out. I stopped him. You have any fish with you? And the guy was so pleasant. He was. He says, yes, sir, I do. I said, well, how many fish do you have? He says, I'm way over the limit. You don't get that very often.
No kidding.
But then I'll tell you a little history here. So I open the trunk, and he's got 185 walleyes in the trunk. One person. So for one person with 185, I don't remember of any other bus that big. 185 walleyes, there they are, they're all packaged, ready to go. And these Wisconsin plates, he was the assistant fire chief of the Milwaukee Fire Department.
Wow.
Were they going to have a fish fry in the Milwaukee Fire Department?
Oh boy.
But the nicest guy, but greed.
Right.
Right? Greed. That's what it is. Even the best people can tip over a little bit on that, see? Plus he got accolades when he went back, too. So that's that thing. Bragging.
Defeat, yeah.
Bragging, yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, that's just one of hundreds of photos that I have like this.
Well, you had a full career, no doubt.
Well, I like taking pictures. I thought it saved me a couple times in court. Do you have any photos? Yeah, I do. You know, so it's been a wonderful career, and I really appreciate you interviewing me on this history. It's the first time I've ever done this. I've never been interviewed
in the other chair.
In the other chair.
And you did well.
And I'm going to continue my Just Outdoors. I'm going to start that up again. We got a couple new ones coming up. And the ICTV has just been wonderful here. Yeah. What a nice product we have here in this town to have our local TV station, the channel.
No kidding.
I mean, come on. We're just a small community. We got our own TV station.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's a great thing.
All you got to do is come in and ask any of the people that work here. You know, I've got this thing I'd like to show or something. There we go. Yeah. What do you got?
Yeah. It is a great thing.
That's what this new program is kind of about now. And so it's really
nice. Good. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
I enjoy watching you in your Just Outdoors. It's a wonderful program.
Well, to everybody out there that hunt and fish, just stay legal, buy your licenses, and have fun. Have fun. And take your kids out there with you.
Yeah. I do see a lot of that.
You do see a lot of that, and that's great. I mean, when I saw kids in a boat, I'd go, you know, first thing I do is talk to the kids. You know, how's it going? Oh, yeah. And that's great. You know,
it is great.
Because they're going to be that adult here in about 10 years. So.
Well, thanks for being here, Tom.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It's great chatting with you. And I guess that's going to wrap it up for the Potluck program for today. And thanks, Tom, for being here. And look forward to seeing everybody the next time. And give us lots of hits. Tom needs them. Tom needs them. Thank you.